Hi, my name is Claire, and I'm here today with my colleague Ben to talk to you guys a little bit about why mobile site speed matters and a couple things that you can do to address and fix some of these issues. So Ben and I sit on a team, and we're mobile evangelists, and we work as UX and performance specialists to help our clients and our partners make the best mobile sites. And specifically, I work with our top clients on conversion optimization.
And I also work with our clients over here, both large and small and between, how to make their sites faster, how to improve their mobile experiences. And I worked for years as a web developer before I came here to Google. And I know how hard it actually is to make a site which is good, that works well on mobile, that's actually fast, that performs well. And it's often easy to forget these kinds of things, like, is my site fast enough? But if we forget these things, users can become frustrated and not look at our sites at all. We spend a lot of time and money getting people to look at our sites in the first place. Let's get them there and give them a great experience.
Yeah. So as more people search for your products and your services on mobile, we want to make sure that we're able to convert that intent into action. But 40% of people say that they will actually leave a site if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. So this is why we really think that you should prioritize mobile site speed as part of your overall mobile experience. And so the goals of today, we definitely want to explain why site speed matters. Hopefully, if anything, that will hit home. And we want to give you some best practices and some tools that you can use to actually address some of those site speed issues. And hopefully, you should leave with some concrete next steps on how to work with your entire mobile team to fix those speed issues.
And the good news is that these things are important. They're a little scary. Many mobile sites are much slower than they have to be. But the good news, as I was saying, there is good news, is that often it's not that hard to make your site a lot faster. Often it can be done in a couple of hours or in a day, and it's a project worth undertaking.
Yes. So again, we're definitely focusing on mobile sites here, but we can't talk about mobile without talking about apps. I think this is a great cartoon that kind of illustrates that.
Yeah, I love this cartoon because it's a great point. I mean, apps are wonderful. We all love our apps. And apps are easy to use, and they're quick. But of course, to get someone to use your app, they've got to first discover the app, and then download the app, and install the app, and try it out. There's a lot of friction involved there. There's a big process. And what if actually you could, instead of doing all this stuff, get a phone that actually had everyone's stuff right there on it, all the good places they wanted to go, already installed on the phone? In fact, you already have that. It's called the mobile web. And mobile websites could be as good as apps. You wouldn't need apps nearly as much, especially for first-time visitors.
Yeah.
And in fact, this is now possible to do. You can get a mobile website which is as good, as fast as an app. And making your mobile website quick is often the first step in getting there.
How many apps? I know I've deleted a lot off my phone. I only use, I think, like 4 or 5, maybe main ones a day. And everything else is done through my browser anyway. I don't know if you're the same.
Yeah, people usually use the big, most popular apps, but the ones that are not as well known just don't get used as much. They often get downloaded and used once, and then later they get erased.
Yep. So this is why we want to focus on the mobile web. But we know that sometimes it can be a pain to be sitting there and waiting. And I know that I don't have a lot of patience. And so when you're waiting for something to load, it really feels like a waste of time. I know if I'm sitting there and I'm seeing a blank screen after a few seconds, if it's something that I really needed to do in the moment, I'll just say, I don't have time for that. I'll go back and I'll do it later, and then I totally forget. And that's just action that's intent that's pretty much wasted. And so when we're thinking about this to even a couple of years ago, we have better sites, we have better phones, we have better networks, and we have higher expectations of what should be delivered. So especially as this continues to evolve, I think our expectations will only get higher and higher. And so when we talk about saying speed matters, what do we really mean? Typically, we're talking about the page load speed and different aspects of how long it takes a page to load. Some people, if you're throwing in some terms that fancy web developers might use, would say DOM load or first paint. But what we're really talking about is the user's experience and their actually feeling of how fast the site loads. And we like to prioritize that because it can help us prioritize what changes we should make to the site, because in the end, it's the user's experience. So for example, we may want to have things loading below the fold or in the background, but make sure that their experience seems as fast as possible.
That was a good point. Yeah, people talk about time to first byte, time to first paint, full DOM load, all these interesting terms your programmers might know. But what actually matters is not, I think, those things so much, but actually when is it the user can actually see what's on their phone right in front of them. And secondarily, when those things actually might work, when buttons might do something. But I think, first of all, just seeing all the stuff that you would see before you had to scroll down, the sooner all that happens, the better off you will be.
Yes. And so what do we think is actually fast? Kind of intuitively, I think everyone feels this. Fast is, if I'm standing in line at the grocery store and I remember I have to check hotel rates for my vacation that's coming up next week, I may have 30 seconds or a minute to do that before I get to the front of the line. And it's going to be a total pain if it's 10 to 15 seconds while I'm just waiting for the site to load. And that gets really annoying. So annoying, so much that people said that when they were browsing the mobile web, the most annoying thing was waiting for slow pages to load. So much more frustrating, 3 times as much than those really annoying pop-up interstitials. So this is something that people really do notice and they see and that they actually care about in the long run. And so again, not only is this really annoying and it is a bad experience, but it actually has an effect on your site and your advertising. So 40% of people say that they will actually leave a site if it takes longer than 3 seconds. And that's what they're kind of perceiving. And so we have to take that into account. And so, in fact, imagine if you got 40% of your traffic back. Would you be okay with losing 40%? Do you think that would actually have a pretty big impact on your site's metrics, your conversion rates, just even the number of revenue coming in the door? And so really, I think the point here is if you're not fast, you're not really giving yourself the chance to engage those users.
Yeah, mobile is different in various ways than desktop too. Desktop is usually a little faster. You've got a better connection normally, but also there's less patience on mobile. I think part of it is that if you're on a desktop machine and you load up a website, it takes a little while to load. You might want to change tabs, do something else for a little while until that page loads up, go back to it. Mobile phone, you can't really do that. So there's that. You would just give up and do something else. Often your time is shorter. Yes. Because you're not driving, I assume, but you're doing something where you may have only a couple of seconds or less time, or your attention might wander. And also because the phone feels like almost like a part of your body now. You want it to respond quickly. When the iPhone was first made, part of why it was so special is that you would touch it and it magically would do something. If you tried to scroll, it would scroll. There was never a delay in any of these things happening. And it felt like a thing you could depend on, like part of like a hand or something. If your hand stops working, if you try to tell your hand, do this, and does nothing, you won't actually abandon your hand, but it could be frustrating.
Definitely very frustrating. And I think that all of this has to, over time, just go back to the fact that it feels like a part of you, and it's something that, we don't have a lot of patience for. And so 1 second delay can actually have a big impact, even on, key KPIs like bounce rate or conversion rate. So much so that on average, it's an 8.3% increase in bounce rate for every second delay, a 3.5% decrease in conversion rate, a 2.1% decrease in cart size, and a 9.4% decrease in page views. So if you haven't been listening to anything thus far, I think that these are the 4 key reasons why you as marketers and developers should be listening and paying attention to your mobile site speed. And it's not just us that keep saying this. We at Google actually really prioritize site speed. We put it at the top of every single one of our pages. And this is something we really actively monitor, making sure that our searches load as quickly as possible. Also, recently, we also added page speed ranking as a ranking signal in Google's search result algorithm. So we're actually really rewarding sites that provide a really good experience for their users, because we know that having slow load and a bad experience is bad for everyone.
The goal of our search is to give people results they can use and pages they can use well that are relevant. And if pages are slow, then it's a bad user experience. Exactly. So we are, again, promoting pages that load faster to higher points in search results.
Yep. And so hopefully by now, you guys realize that site speed is important, especially on mobile. But Ben, what do you think is actually a good load time?
That's a really good question, because to make a site really fast takes some work. But we actually, let me about to click over there for a second. Yeah, thank you. We're going to share this clicker because we share everything over here at Google. Turns out, there it is, 2 seconds. We think that 2 seconds is actually a good spot to be at. This isn't just a random number. We actually have done studies, and there have been various studies people have done that aren't from Google that show that at 2 seconds, If your page is usable within 2 seconds, it just performs better in various ways. If it takes 10 seconds before like the visible content is there, if your hero image isn't appearing for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, it may frustrate users. If you can get there in 5 seconds where things are visible, that's pretty good. If you can get there in 2 seconds, it feels really, really nice to the users.
Definitely.
We actually have some numbers on that.
Yeah, and so we have an actual case study. So this is a company that we work with a lot, Sosta. They're a web performance firm, and they do a lot of consulting. And this was an actual case that they worked on for a website. Originally, you can see the load started out at about 9 seconds. And they got it all the way kind of back down to that 2 to 3. And you can see here that it directly correlates to conversion rate. So for every second that they made it faster, they saw on average a 27% increase in CVR. And so you notice here too, going from 9 to 6 is actually pretty much the same. People still probably are getting frustrated and bouncing a lot more. Thus the conversion rate is a lot lower and kind of plateaus out. But going from 6 to 2, you have almost a 2x increase in conversion rate. And that's where that kind of measurable difference in actual feeling that experience actually pans out.
That's the sweet spot we talked about before.
Yes, exactly. And same thing here, looking at bounce rate. So again, same client, and this is what they saw for bounce rate as they actually made their page speed lower. Unlike conversion rate, this actually doesn't plateau. So if you're going from 5 seconds to 10 seconds, your bounce rate just gets higher and higher because people aren't going to put up with that actual experience.
One anomaly here is that if you're at 1 second or at 1.5 seconds, things seem like they're actually worse. But this is because if a page doesn't work at all and throws an error, that often occurs very quickly. So this is also counted in these results as well.
Yeah. So you can think of like 404 error pages there. And so actually applying some revenue numbers to this is just an example, but say you're an e-commerce company and you know your average order value, you know how many people roughly come to your site per month, and you have a decent e-commerce conversion rate. Typically we say 1.5. And say your site loaded at 15 seconds on a 3G network. We really like to use 3G just because that's still kind of a national average, and always kind of you can optimize for the lowest common denominator. But say that you move from 15 to 5 seconds. That would be an extra almost $3.5 million a year in revenue by just addressing speed. If you got it to 3 seconds, it would be over 7.5 million. And so the thing here is just that speed at the end of the day is speed equals money, and it is really proven for business impact. Yep.
And yeah, also it often takes a very small amount of developer time to get to these better speed ratings and then to get more money from conversion. So often you can invest even $5,000 in developer time and make $100,000, $1 million from $10,000. If you think about the money, it really, really is worth investing some time in this as soon as possible. Also, you mentioned average speed times. I think that now more than half of people in America have access to 4G at most times. Mm-hmm. But it means that, of course, people often don't have access to 4G. They're often on 3G, and 4G may be spotty sometimes. So you can't really assume people have 4G connections. You don't want to have 30 or 40% of your users getting a slow experience because they're lacking 4G at a given time.
Yep. And so, again, kind of speed being business impact, we're not the only ones that are thinking about this. There are a lot of companies out there that have really started to prioritize speed specifically for mobile. So a couple examples I always like to put out or like to show are just Fathead. They actually saw a 37% increase in their speed and had a 70% increase in mobile revenue per user. So again, dollars in the door. Another great one is Amazon. They work to shave off 100 milliseconds, which doesn't seem like much. But if you're Amazon, that was 1% more revenue, which you can just guess how much.
It's probably a lot of money.
Probably a lot of money, yeah. And so as more and more companies kind of move in this direction, these are the experiences you're being compared against. So you don't want to fall behind because this is what users are coming to expect. So we've talked a lot about, why this is important, but what are some of the ways that we can actually address some of these issues, understand what they are on the site, and at least start to put together a plan to address these with developers?
Well, as consensus has grown in the last several years, that speed is really important. And as mobile devices have become often the primary device for people's browsing. After all, I think that last year at some point, Google searches became more common on mobile devices than desktops in 10 different countries. including the US. So people realized that speed is really important, and various tools and helper things proliferated, that's a hard word to say, appeared to make this more easy to diagnose your site and also to figure out what to fix and fix your site. So a couple of tools we'll discuss and actually show you today. Page Speed Insights, which is a thing that looks at your web page and analyzes it and gives you advice on how to make it faster. Web page tests, which is similar, not quite as easy to use, but has more detailed information. And if you get a little more ambitious, or if you have a programming background, or just want to try this out, because non-programmers also can use this, Chrome DevTools is built into Google Chrome. You actually can load this up on your Chrome and see actually what's happening on your site. And we'll show you a couple things you can do, anybody can do, to see the most clear culprits of bad page speed. You don't use Chrome. Firefox has something similar. So does Internet Explorer. I think Safari does too. These debugging tools exist in every major browser. And again, they're not that hard to use.
So do we want to hop into some demos?
Let us do that, yes. Let's show you some things over here. So first of all, here is Page Speed Insights. Easy to find on your favorite browser, whatever it might be. You can type in Page Speed Insights, and it will reappear there magically for you there. So let's look at a sample site, for example. We're going to use some Google sites over here, because Google sites we think are pretty good, and the programmers here work very hard on making things fast, but they occasionally make some mistakes or miss something. We've actually found a couple examples where Google also could be better. It's really hard to do this, as we said before, hard to keep all your sites nice all the time. So we'll show you a couple of examples, some common culprits.
Yeah, and I think that this is it's a consistent working process. You always have to work to improve it and be checking up. So
yeah, there'll be occasional mistakes. Actually, before I should tell you about a couple of things we're going to look for. So some of the most common problems on sites that make them slow, well, even before that, let's go back to some basic principles about how these things will work. Pardon my lack of demo here. The most important things you want to do, basically, are to not load up too much stuff, because loading up stuff takes time. So of course, loading up lots of bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, takes more time than fewer bytes. And also, it's important to load up as few things as possible on mobile devices. It turns out that on a mobile phone, each thing that your web page has to actually request from the server is a separate request, requiring sometimes, if you're not lucky, a separate connection to the cell phone tower. So if your web page asks for like 20 different things, which could be images, it could be JavaScript, it could be other kinds of things, then that takes a certain amount of time. If you ask for 40 things, that will take longer. If you ask for 90 or 100 things, that takes even longer. And that is not that uncommon. I've seen 200, 300. I saw 900 once.
Oh, God.
But 100 is not that uncommon. It just takes some discipline not to put make your site full of all these things. And if you're loading up, back to the first idea, the amount of stuff, if you're loading up a megabyte of stuff, that's kind of a lot, but maybe doable. If it's 2 megabytes, that takes twice as long or more in many cases. 3 or 4 megabytes, that's not so good. So you want to really try to avoid loading too much stuff and try to avoid loading too many things. Pretty simple. And the browser has the ability to actually cache things that it loads up. So it loads up your resources, whether they're images or scripts or whatever they are. It will then keep those things in the phone in memory for as long as you want it to. But if you don't tell it to do that, it won't do it. So if your server says, OK, every 60 minutes, my stuff's going to change, load it again. If your user goes back to your site, it loads all the stuff again from scratch, which is a massive increase in load time. So you want to avoid loading things you don't have to load. And finally, as we said before, you want to load things that appear first.
Yes.
If you've got like a large image or a video that takes scrolling down to actually see, load that later. Load your hero image first. Load your company logo first, all those things you would see on the very, very first page, the call to action. Load those things up first.
So let's check out some of these sites.
Yes. So here's an example. Let's look at Google Keep, which is a very fine product, I might say, and see how it comes out over here in Page Speed Insights. So we'll analyze the site over here, and it gives you results for mobile and for desktop. It isn't actually that bad. 69 is not a terrible score. It's got some recommendations over here. Some of these things are beyond the scope of this talk, I think, about redirects and so on and so forth. It will show you things like minify JavaScript. And minifying is about taking your code and just making it more compact. Which you can do, it isn't always done. And it'll give you ways you actually can do that, what you can save by doing that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about this tool is that anyone can go to it and plug in their website and get a score. We typically recommend that people aim to be at 85 or above, as high as you can, obviously, but that's kind of the sweet spot. But this is something that has direct links out to Google developers articles. You can forward this on to your web developer team, and they should have a pretty good idea of how to address these issues upfront.
Yeah, they'll recognize these things in most cases and know what to do with them. We might get a little more useful advice from looking at a different site, Google Cloud, a new product. So again, it analyzes, it goes and looks at the site, pulls down the resources, looks for ways to actually optimize. Notice also that when things are slower, you want to give up in the middle. You want to maybe abandon these things. We're not going to, though. We're going to go over here. So 62, not quite as good. It's got some more advice on the top over here. If you have JavaScript or CSS, which is basically code of various sorts or styling of various sorts, that's loaded up before anything can appear. You want to avoid those things. Browser caching, you mentioned caching before. You want to be able to cache resources. And if you expand this over here, you can see a whole bunch of things that are not being cached. So the timing over there shows how long we actually have told the browser to actually store things before reloading them. And notice a lot of things are 60 minutes, and they're just a bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
And they're all 60 minutes the whole way down. That's just wasted time.
Yeah, and you can think of, too, people on mobile might be doing this in like short segments. So I might start looking for a pair of shoes, and I might come back an hour or two later. I might go on my desktop, actually, look at the products really big, but then I might actually buy them while I'm on the bus home from work. And so as you think of, if people are coming to that site multiple times throughout the day and you're having to reload everything every single time, it's more work for the network and for your phone to do.
Very much. You can cache things for usually a month or two. And things have to change all of a sudden. There are ways to actually break that cache automatically. Yeah. So there's not really any reason not to cache these things. Let's look actually at these things in DevTools for a minute, because it will show us what's going on a little more clearly. It's kind of like detective work. It gives you a chance to look at your site and look for something that could be wrong with it somewhere. Also things that could be right about it, because many sites are very good.
Yes.
We're going to be a little bit pessimistic today and look for things that are wrong. So let's look over here, for example, at Google Keep. So we're going to type again over here, google.com. Actually, I didn't show you what I did over here. I actually went over here and opened up the developer tools in the bottom. And there's I can't see it over here on the screen, but there's an option on the menu to do that. Also Control-S, Control-Shift-I will do that. So on the bottom, I'm taking off the cache. There also is an option over here to actually throttle, which means you actually can simulate a slower network, 3G or 4G, which is pretty useful for most sites to see how they actually load up when they're slower. Let's actually go to maybe good 3G, for example, because that's pretty typical of how sites actually load up in the real world. And now we're there. You also can, over here on the side, simulate various devices. So this is a desktop device. This thing over here is a mobile phone. I've chosen the Galaxy S5. I used to have one of those phones until recently. And let's just try it out. So let's type this in over here and hit enter and watch it load up. So Google Keep for a little while, that wasn't so bad. We're seeing actually the first image appearing over there. And then things will kind of gradually appear as we go down over here. And there they are. That was not as bad as I expected it to be.
You can see, though, the CTA kind of loaded first, then the text.
That was smart of us to do it that way, wasn't it? Let's make it a little slower and see how that actually looks. I'm going to just knock that out there, little programmer trick, and load it up again. The network tab over here will show you what's actually happening and being loaded up. So if you can see at the bottom over there, it's loading up things. It's showing you how much stuff gets transferred. So in this case over here, it took a little while to get to that point, maybe 8 seconds to get that here image loaded up. 8 seconds isn't so bad, but again, 2 seconds is really nice to have. If it can just appear, isn't that nice? So let's actually look at what might be slow over here. We're going to expand this bottom area and take a look at this. It's still loading up over here, loading up some stuff. We can sort by size, which is very useful, and look for anything which is really big first. Are any large things lying around that are making our page slow? Look in the very bottom of that. Wow. Okay. This is actually not very good. So notice in the very, very far bottom on the left, we have 2.8 megabytes transferred. That's a lot. It's 2,800,000 odd bytes being loaded up for one page. And notice at the very bottom over here, you see where it says handflat-2x.png? PNGs are images. Look over to size, 1.4 megabytes.
That's a massive image.
I think so. The single image actually is half of the entire page weight. So that one image is half of the load time of this page. That's kind of mind-boggling. So what is this really important image that we're loading up over there? Let's double click on it. That's a nice image.
It's a nice image of a hand, but I don't think I need that whole thing on my mobile phone, though.
In an awesome retina display kind of
Yes.
way. Yeah, I think that is a little bit extreme. Let's see where this even is on the page over here. It's not on the very top, so it's loaded maybe at the wrong time as well. And somewhere down here, we're going to see it.
There we go.
There it is, yeah. So way down there, there's this one hand. So we recommend images be 100 kilobytes or smaller. And you can almost always optimize the image down to that amount or even less than that. So it's smaller than 1.4 megabytes.
And maybe say a little bit about kind of compression and how you can use compression to just make your images smaller.
Yeah, various tools exist out there, even things that come with your Mac, like Preview, or come with your Windows machine, like Paint. And there's other third-party tools you can use just to save your images as smaller images, low-resolution images, because you won't see all that in your phone anyway. And if you have an awesome image that you want to see every detail of, and it takes 5 seconds, 10 seconds to load, people are never going to see it. They're going to give up before it gets there. There are also other images here that are pretty big in the bottom. There is this hero image, this footer image. These are all, I think, a little bit too big. Then the rest are pretty good sizes, but that's a problem for Google Keep.
And I would say that this is one of the most common ones that we see, just mobile phones having really large images that slow down just overall page load. So this is something I think everyone can go do, is just check the images on your home page or some of your high traffic landing pages and diagnose those issues.
Yeah, go look at those things now. You can find those images, get rid of those. It's often the biggest problem on a page and often really easy to fix. Just make the images smaller. Your page speed can increase by a factor of 2. It happens all the time. So go try that on your sites, of course, after this talk is done. Let's
Don't leave now.
because we have more things to tell you about. Here's another Google site that is pretty good. It gets pretty good results in page speed insights, but it's got something that could be improved on it. Doubleclick.net. So it's loading up over here in 3G. That took a little while to actually show up, didn't it? Notice at the bottom over here how many requests are happening. We've already passed 100 requests. 132, 134. So this is a pretty slow loading page because it has a lot of requests. What are all these things that are being loaded? You can actually look around over here. You can see the various kinds of things that your page will use. 12 JavaScript files. That's not so many. 2 CSS files is pretty good.
Yeah.
Images, 107 images. That's a lot of images.
Again, a lot of images.
Yeah, and none of them are that big, but there's a lot of them. A lot of them are just these very small things. These are arrows. These are little icons, things like that. So there are ways you actually can take these small images and squish them into bigger images, called spriting, for example, and just show the part that you want to show at any given point, and just load up fewer images.
Yeah. So I think this goes back to some of the don't load too much stuff.
Yes, exactly. So don't load too much stuff or too many different things.
Yeah.
We also had some volunteers who wanted to talk about their sites over here.
Yes, we had one volunteer. So this brave volunteer will go ahead and pull up as well.
Yeah, here's the page. Let's actually put it in Page Speed Insights and see what it says, because it's fun to do these things. It's suspenseful, it's exciting. And I think the good news, by the way, is that this page was pretty good. I can't paste for some reason. Because this actually is a Chromebook. Let's try it that way.
There we go.
There it is. Analyze. Specialized digitalmarketing.com. You need a drum roll or something, or some sort of theme music to make this more exciting. 87 out of 100. That's a super good score.
Nice.
we rarely see scores that good. So kudos to you.
Yes.
Let's look at the site and dev tools now, in case anything is hiding that, which is kind of special down there. Let's load it up again. I loaded it up before we started this talk. Let's load it up one more time. Throttling is off over here, so it'll be pretty quick. And there it is. So again, our detective work, any obvious culprits of slow load time. 1 megabyte transferred, that's kind of a lot, but it isn't so bad. I think 400K is really pretty good, but 1 megabyte is less than some people do. 23 requests is very few requests. That's outstanding. Good job again. Looking over here, this is sorted by size. I do see one thing, though, that's quite large. On the very bottom, it's called Berwick Theodore Front Street, 637K. It's more than half of your page load time is this one image. So let's look at the image over here and see what it is. Double click on it.
It's a nice theater.
A good old-fashioned looking theater, Free Birds. It must be a movie called Free Birds. Which are actually handing out birds for free, which I would go see in a second. So the weird thing is I don't see that on the page anywhere. We're scrolling down over here, and maybe it's somewhere at the bottom.
Doesn't appear to be there.
I don't see it. We could do some really quick detective work over here. This is more for your programmers to do, to go through and actually look for this thing. What was it called? Berwick. OK, there it is. So it looks like something at the top of the screen. This little square over there contains these images. And I can't see the images. So I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. Maybe it would appear at some point while using the page. But I would say if you're doing that, then load it later. If it's there by accident, then don't load it at all.
Yeah.
And you'll make your pretty fast page even faster immediately.
And do you see that happening a lot, where there's a lot of images that maybe were on a desktop site and aren't even actually appearing on mobile, but still loading in?
Yes, all the time. So people do a lot of responsive design, and they'll have an image that actually appears on the desktop site, but isn't used at all on mobile, or you can't see it without moving something around, and they will slow down page speed. Or people will load one image for every device sometime on the same page, and that's just wastes time as well. You can do various things like media queries, other techniques on the browser side or server side to load the images that you need, not the ones you don't actually need.
Yes.
Actually, I didn't try that. Maybe it appears over here.
Well, I want to save time for some Q&A at the end, because we do have some questions coming in.
Oh, great. Okay.
So if you want to go through kind of the most common elements that we're still seeing, and then we'll get to some Q&A.
Let's stop this demo over here then. And let's look at the slides again for one more minute. So we discussed these things before, but let's just review them over here. So often, images are the biggest problem. We see here that images are more than half of the average page's total weight, and that's not necessary in almost any case. There you see Google Keep over there, the 2 large images at the bottom. Just don't do it. You can compress those images. If they're larger than 100K, think about why you want those things. If your marketers say, we need this beautiful, beautiful image to appear, that's wonderful, but if it never appears, it's not so wonderful.
And I think for mobile, it's speed and simplicity over beautiful Retina images most of the time.
Yeah, and they look almost as good at 100K, honestly, as at a megabyte, especially on a small screen. And then often pages load lots of resources. There's an example there from doubleclick.net. 100+ resources is not that uncommon. This can be solved also. There's ways you can easily make a build process if you're a programmer, or use mod page speed to just combine the small resources into a few bigger ones. Problem solved. Number 3, cache time's too short. Again, if your server tells the browser, all these things we're loading up here, don't cache them for too long because they're going to change in 60 minutes. So don't save these things on the phone. After 60 minutes, throw them away. They're being reloaded unnecessarily. You're just wasting the user's time and the phone's time. And number 4, also very important, if it isn't going to be seen immediately by the user, then load it later. So load your hero image, your call to action, all those things first, things you want to see first. If there are things that will happen later on the page that are images, that are at all big, videos especially, any kind of JavaScript that runs complicated things, slideshows, whatever, load those things later. So So load the first things first.
Yes, and that makes it look interactive, even if the entire page isn't. So some takeaways, I think, kind of to sum everything up. We want to make sure that you guys know where you stand and you have tools to do that. Like web page test is not one that we went over, but it's a great additional tool you can run your site, your speed through. Page speed insights, Chrome developer tools. Google Analytics is also a great tool to look at pages that may have higher bounce rate. And so you can diagnose those. Secondly, just work with your developer team to go through some of these same exercises. And we recommend prioritizing 3 key improvements. We went through a lot of the usual suspects, so probably a lot of these will be the same ones. And then work with your team for mobile to set KPIs. So whether that be 2 seconds, PSI above 85, web page test under 2000, make sure that you just have some type of goal that you're working to hit. And that way, you know, over time, you can go back and kind of assess whether you're still at that goal or not. So we have a couple Q&As, questions that came through while we were doing this. So the first one is, does the type of hosting and the hosting company you choose affect site speed, even if you optimize your site?
That's a good question, because you might have a slow host, maybe of some sort, that returns resources more slowly.
Mm-hmm.
It can, but I think it's not the usual problem that we see. Actually, you can look at PageSpeed Insights. It will give you, if you actually have a server that responds slowly in more than half a second, for example, for a resource, it will warn you about those things. So if you have a really slow server and you're being overloaded, like if you're Pokemon Go, for example, sometimes now you can't get on at all. That happens sometimes, but in almost all cases, the problem isn't that. In almost all cases, the problem is just sites that have too much stuff on them, load up too many things.
Yeah, but it will show up in PageSpeed Insights too. So recommend trying that out first.
I should warn you, if you optimize your site and still have problems, you can consider changing hosts, but it's not a problem we usually see.
Yeah. So another question we have here is there a way to let my desktop site have higher resolution images than my mobile site?
Yes, there are ways to do that. Yeah, it might go into more programmery stuff a little bit, but there's various ways this can be done, which are commonly used techniques. One, for example, is called a media query. So actually, your page is CSS, which is the styling on the page that makes it look the way it looks, can actually, well, actually, when the browser, anyway, the point is that it can know what kind of device is being used and load up images accordingly. So you can say, if the screen is this big, load up this image. If the screen is bigger, load up this image. That will work, for example. You also can do it on the server side. So when the server actually gets a request for your web page, it can know what kind of device is being used and return an appropriate image. There's more ways than that, but there definitely are techniques you can use.
Yeah. And I think it's just something, if you have a lot of images, probably just to bring up with your development team what they're currently using and maybe look into a couple other solutions.
And sometimes your CMS will make it harder to load up certain images for certain devices, but it's, again, a thing that you have to do.
Yeah. And so I think we have time for one more here. So we get a lot of questions about adaptive or responsive. Is one faster than the other? Mm-hmm. Is one easier to optimize? So maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, this is discussed a lot, and people go back and forth on adaptive and responsive. If you're curious about what these things actually mean, so adaptive in general is in the case where on the server, it chooses what to actually display in the browser. So the server would know what kind of device it is and send out appropriate content. And responsive is more that the browser has to actually know. So you send all the stuff to the browser, and then there are rules in your website that tell what to actually display or not display. You can tell because if you actually take your browser screen on your desktop and you shrink it and you expand it, if the screen layout changes, that means it's got responsive stuff going on. People always ask us this question, actually. They ask, well, what's better? What does Google recommend? And I always say that they're both useful. And honestly, they're not mutually exclusive. You can do a little bit of both. And you probably will do a little bit of both. You'll probably have some rules in your server, some rules in your CSS. You can combine these things as you wish to do. I think that also is important just to do something. If your site hasn't got anything going on of this sort, just do a few things to fix the biggest problems and go from there. There also, of course, are specific MDOT sites where the site is a whole different site that you can load up. And that also works, too. I think it just depends on your case and your programmers, your use case, how much old stuff you have lying around. It just really depends. Sorry about that more vague answer, but I think it's a truthful answer.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you guys for tuning in today. We really appreciate your time, and have a good one.
Thank you very much.